Internet is one of the most powerful tools that we use in society. It would allow people to communicate instantly, share their information, and mobilize at this scale we've never actually seen before at all. But in moments like crisis, like civil unrest, that same speed can actually become dangerous. So proud to propose. So a few points on setup then before I move on to my arguments. What does civil unrest actually look like? Well, it usually starts with protests or demonstrations. People gather in the streets, hold signs, chant, and obviously want to demand change. At this stage, it can still somehow be still peaceful, like marches, rallies, and sit-ins. But if the tensions obviously rise, it could escalate into something more disruptive. In more intense situations, it could turn into riots or clashes. We might see fights between protesters and police, property damage, looting or vandalisms, or use of tear gas or force of authorities. At this point, things become very unstable and hard to control, and oftentimes disrupting the normal life and sometimes obviously into violence or chaos. So looking at the status quo right now, we already see governments using internet shutdowns during protests or elections, because they view it as something that's necessary for emergency measures. But at the same time, we also see the consequences of not acting fast enough, where things like misinformation spread online and leads to real world violence or panic, which I'll explain more in my speech later on. So moving on to my framework. As proposition, we frame this debate around situations of immediate and large-scale harm, where their decisions have to be made quickly and the consequences are irreversible. So the role of the government is not to preserve the perfect freedom, but to minimize the amount of harm in the most shortest amount of time. So done with setup, let me move on to my two substantive arguments. Firstly, internet shutdowns are necessary to prevent immediate harm during the crises, and secondly, how it limits the spread of misinformation. So in times of crisis like riots, ethnic conflict, or political instability, the internet becomes the fastest tool for mass coordination. So information spreads quite instantly, but so does misinformation and their panic and their call for violence. So two layers of analysis for this then. Firstly, harmful actors rely heavily on real-time communication to organize these violences. Messaging apps and social media like WhatsApp and Instagram share locations and coordinate attacks. When the internet is shut down, the coordination becomes a lot harder and slower and less efficient. So these disruptions would buy time for the authorities to regain their control over their country and prevent the situations from spiraling uncontrollably. And most importantly, the biggest beneficiaries here are the vulnerable civilians who are at risk during the unrest. These include the minorities, people living in these conflict zones, and those unable to physically escape danger. By slowing down the formation and reducing the coordination attacks, shutdowns, we reduce the likelihood of widespread violence targeting these groups. So for even if internet shutdowns are inconvenient and disrupt their daily life, those harms are temporary and reversible. Whereas the physical harm from unchecked violence, like injury, they're basically, and long-term instability is irreversible. And that's why this debate belongs to side proposition. So moving on to my second argument. In crisis situations, misinformation, like I said earlier, spreads faster than verified facts. So false rumors about attacks, ethnic tensions, or government actions can obviously trigger panic, right? And therefore they may use internet shutdowns as a tool to temporarily contain the misinformation environment, preventing the rapid spread of harmful stories that can worsen instability. So two layers of analysis. Firstly, misinformation thrives on the speed and the reach. When the internet is active, these false claims can go viral within minutes, reaching thousands or millions before they can even be corrected. Shutdowns interrupt this claim entirely, stopping the misinformation from even spreading further. Because this is especially important when false information directly incites the violence or the fear. And secondly, vulnerable communities are often the first targets of misinformation, because when you're in a stage of panic, you never to check or not, because you just want to see what's actually happening in this world. False misinformation can lead to scapegoating, where specific groups are blamed or attacked. And by stopping the spread of these narratives, shutdowns reduce the risk of targeted violence against the minorities and marginalized population. For example, let's look at the status quo situations like the ICE raids. We see how information spreads online, but not all of it is accurate panels. Social media amplifies the emotional and sometimes false narratives before they can be verified, which obviously creates more panic and anger among the public. when people act on that kind of, it could escalate into things like more protests, into more down. In these these moments can change. These moments can actually help that rapid spread before it actually causes into like real world harm. So this kind of specifically, especially affects the vulnerable communities living in those areas, because they are the ones caught in the middle of the confusion and unrest, because they don't really know what's actually true, what's actually false, and what's actually happening. Information actually spreads, they face higher risk of this panic, wrongful targeting to different to people who are actually wrong, or being caught in escalating conflict. So moreover, ordinary citizens are protected and from widespread panic. Panic can lead to more dangerous behaviors, hoarding, or fleeing into unsafe situations, because they don't actually know what's going on. By limiting the flow of unverified information, then the shutdowns help maintain a more calm environment, which is especially important for people who lack resources to respond to sudden crises. So, Judge, this matters because misinformation doesn't just stay online, right? It translates into this real world fear, panic, and retaliation. The impact of the vulnerable actors is obviously severe, as they are more likely to be more targeted or unable to respond to sudden chaos because they don't really know what's going on. Even a short window of control over misinformation can prevent the long term, which means that the benefits of stopping the dangerous stories and narratives outweigh the temporary restriction of access. So this is why I'm so proud to propose. Thank you.
As of right now in this world, there are many problems that many countries are facing, including innocent citizens. They're trying to show how they feel from these problems, for example, by protesters sharing online. The government can simply use violence, or they have full control of all these platforms so that these people are trapped and they cannot show how much they're suffering. Therefore, I believe that the government should not have the right to simply just shut down internet systems when there's people who are maybe protesting. In my speech, I will first give two extensions, which are firstly, there's more impact shown when rather than after, and secondly, um, it hides the suffering. After that, I will rebut against the government's points, which were false information and using internet platforms to plan attacks. So first, my first point. Imagine if you go on social media, which would you be more concerned about? If someone posted something that was, and all they say was, we were yesterday night, for example, Iran, or would you follow the uh, article which has a video of the text as well as saying the same thing as them? I think that it would the article of the video would be a bigger concern. If the government just for some shuts down all these platforms during these protests themselves or during their problems, people will not be able to show evidence of what's actually happening, how much they're suffering. If those videos show maybe bombs or such, if they're being attacked, then yes, it would look like a major concern. The people are visibly suffering because they're being attacked and such. But if all those people say is just giving detail about how they're attacked, there are pistol soldiers everywhere and everything, it could still it doesn't sound very real. Many people will probably think it's fake because there's no proper evidence. It just sounds like something that someone. So if the government doesn't, if the government lets them keep this, they can record maybe whatever is actually happening during that problem itself, showing the proper suffering and what's actually happening at that moment. So my second point, too much government power which results in hiding the suffering. If right now, if the government already has a lot of power, but what if the government could have even more? The government has the ability to change laws or anything. They decide how they want to run the country. If they want people to suffer, they want to make new laws so that they can go richer and everything, so they can live however they want. They can just do that. They can just um, do whatever they want. They can make people pay extra and everything. And if they make people suffer by For example, maybe you have to pay 100% of whatever you get, for example. This will result in many people suffering as well. But the people won't be able to actually show that they're suffering because the government can simply say if you're showing the public or outside world that you are suffering, then there will be consequences. This creates fear inside of them, and they fear the government as well. So the government has too much power. They can just control the people however they want. It's like the government is like the person, and the people are just toys to play with. So on to my rebuttal. Firstly, the opposition says false information. But even let's say if it was false information, they would have a reason to create this false information, right? It would be maybe when the government did something wrong to them or the country. You wouldn't just start making false information about someone just because you just found out about them and now you want to create something that they did wrong, which they didn't actually do. They probably would have made these people maybe suffer or do something resulted in them resulted in something really bad happening like trauma. So there will be they wouldn't just post false information for absolutely no reason. And if the government did something to them, this information would probably be real instead. So they also said that these planning for platforms are used for the likes of maybe planning attacks or so. But during protests, I don't really think that there's going on, especially since the people who these civilians, innocent civilians, are protesting against are maybe yes.
Recognize that civil unrest includes potential civil wars, terrorist attacks, and etc. It's not only peaceful protests on the streets that we see in modern developed countries.
Yes, while this, yes, their more protests do have some armed weapons and such, but I don't think this is very likely either. These armed protests or violent protests only happen when there's like a big conflict in that one country. The government really did something wrong, and now they really want to show it because the government has maybe they had peaceful protests beforehand. The government just ignoring those, maybe even using violence of their own to stop those protests. So people are just coming back to show how much this pain really means to them. So to conclude in my speech, I first provided two extensions, which are more the impact is bigger if it's shown in the situation itself, and government has too much power. Then I rebutted the opposition's points, which are false information and using platforms to plan attacks.
Panels, when a protest turns violent, rumors can spread faster than they are verified, and within minutes, crowds are redirected across the city based on information no one can confirm. We've seen this in India, in Myanmar, and in Sri Lanka, where political protests and online coordination and misinformation escalated unrest beyond what authorities could immediately control. In moments like these, the speed of digital communication becomes part of the problem rather than the solution. I'll do three things in this speech. First, I will rebuild the core of governance in two pieces of rebuttal, and third and finally of all, I will bring one additional argument that clarifies why side government wins in this debate. At the core of our case is a simple mechanism. During periods of civil unrest, the speed and scale of digital communication can escalate harm faster than traditional systems can respond. We gave you structural analysis in our first speech that has not been responded to about how misinformation, coordination of violence, and real-time amplification interact to overwhelm public order during times of civil unrest. Why side government wins in this regard of unrest is because this policy is not about permanent censorship. Our burden in this debate is to show that our model, a targeted temporary intervention that slows down escalation at the precise moment where harm compounds the fastest online, creates the best outcome during times of civil unrest. When the flow of information is unrestricted in the internet in these conditions, false claims can spread like a wildfire before they're ever verified. Groups will mobilize before authorities can assess risk, and panic becomes a self-reinforcing loop. The absence of friction is what makes these situations spiral. Opposition needs to prove that maintaining full internet access produces better these exact moments of instability. They have not done that. Instead, they assume that more information automatically leads to better decisions without engaging how information behaves under crisis conditions or even considering the impact of this motion on the true vulnerable actors of this debate, namely the government and its citizens. But first, my two pieces of rebuttals. First, opposition has said that shutting down the internet silences important voices and prevents people from accessing critical information. The only evidence they give of this is the assumption that all information online is beneficial during unrest. Now, two responses here. Well, in moments of crisis, information is not neutral. A significant portion of it is unverified, emotionally charged, or in the absolute worst case scenario, deliberately misleading, which actively worsens decision making on the ground, especially during the scenario that opposition brought up during times of war, like in Iran. Times of civil unrest are precisely moments of emotional turbulence, where fear and anger shape how people interpret what they see and what they post. If you were in the middle of a chaotic protest, hearing all sorts of claims about violence nearby, would you carefully verify each piece of information before reacting? The answer for most of us is no, you won't run, and that applies to a majority of citizens as well. People respond quickly, often instinctively, and that is exactly what allows misinformation to spread and escalate in situations like these. And in this context, unrestricted access does not guarantee clarity. It often amplifies confusion and risk. Second, governments still retain alternative channels of communication, such as official broadcasts and emergency alerts, which negates the need for internet access during these times of unrest. The claim that all access to information, sorry, I'll take that, Bjorn.
Okay, so when you turn off the internet, do the lies disappear, or do people just spread those lies by word of mouth, and so nobody can fact check those lies?
In response to that, I'll say that, as my PM has mentioned, the internet is a place where rumors can spread much faster since on-the-ground communication spreads from word of online, things can spread through viral posts. You see these posts that promote civil unrest with millions, with thousands of likes. These spread much faster than word of mouth, which is what we're trying to do here. We're trying to negate the harm caused by these rumors. Okay, now moving on to my second argument, a second rebuttal. Governments still retain alternative channels of communication, such as official broadcasts and emergency alerts. Now, what do we mean by these alternative channels? Our model provides controlled, reliable, and centralized forms of communication that are designed specific situations where accuracy matters more than speed. Governments can rely on official broadcast systems such as television or SMS-based emergency alerts. These are one-directional, verified channels where information is filtered before reaching the public, unlike these viral online posts. This ensures that updates about safe zones or areas to avoid are consistent and not contradicted by politically charged rumors circulating online. If you've ever heard or received a tsunami warning or Amber Alert, these formal broadcasts can look something like that. But most importantly, these formal are often more immediate and context-specific, allowing people to receive instructions that are directly relevant to their location, rather than relying on fragmented, opinionated information from across the internet. Now, moving on to my second rebuttal. Opposition argues that this power will inevitably be abused by governments to suppress dissent. I'd like to point out that opposition engages with a very sweeping generalization of state behavior here. There are contexts where institutions are more accountable and where legal safeguards exist to limit misuse. This debate concerns whether the right should exist, not whether every government will exercise it correctly. And more importantly, opposition shifts the focus of this debate towards whether dissent, when the immediate priority during periods of civil unrest is risk minimization, when people are being injured on the streets, when violence is spreading unpredictably across the city, the urgency lies in reducing harm as quickly as possible. Whether the political cause behind the unrest is justified or not does not change the fact that escalation carries real, immediate consequences. This debate is not a what-if scenario of a dictatorship, as opposition claims. The possibility of abuse does not negate the necessity of the tool when genuine threats to public safety arise. Thus, Prime Minister's argument still stands. Now, additionally, now onto my one additional argument. Internet shutdowns prevent the harm caused or experienced by the stakeholders in this debate. This includes both organized actors during unrest and bystander citizens. There are a couple pieces of context that we must understand to answer this debate. First, modern unrest is not only spontaneous. It is often shaped by actors who deliberately use digital platforms to coordinate movements or exploit moments of instability. We point to the examples of riots where messaging apps and social media are used to direct hate groups towards specific locations and escalate situations in real time. We can see how unrestricted internet access expands the number of people exposed to harm in ways. First, for individuals trying to avoid unrest. Real-time updates, viral posts often create confusion about where it is safe to go. People may unknowingly move towards dangerous areas because information is incomplete or inaccurate. So instead of reducing exposure, the constant stream of random information pulls more people into proximity with violence. And second, for individuals actively participating in protests. The internet allows rapid mobilization and escalation where who are not initially involved are drawn in through viral content or calls to action that spread quickly online without context. By restricting internet access, governments can disrupt this coordination channel. Significantly harder to organize large-scale actions quickly or redirect groups in real time when you are separated physically. This does not eliminate political unrest completely, but it does reduce its intensity and limits its ability to spread across locations. Judge, when we compare both worlds, we offer a mechanism that slows escalation, reduces panic-driven misinformation, and disrupts coordinated harm. Opposition offers a model that assumes ideal behavior in inherently chaotic conditions. For these reasons, we are proud to stand on side government. Thank you.
Okay, Judge, we believe that the government should not only be able to shut down the internet or any source of social media, we believe that when the government announces a law or politics, the a law or politics, the society should be able to talk and share everyone's opinions on it. So in my speech, I will first do a refutation to the opening government's points, rebuild the leader of opposition, then summarize why we have won. So, okay, so moving on to my refutation. According to the Prime Minister, the civil unrest creates a chaos and crisis and harm to the government. So firstly, when riots or protests happen, it's always because the population or society disagrees with the government or have negative perspectives and on a problem the government has created, which means that when the internet is shut down by the government is basically gatekeeping the society and not letting them talk about anything the government has done and not letting them talk about anything negative about the government's politics and laws. So moving on to rebuilding the leader of opposition's point. So according to the leader of opposition's point on how when the government has the ability to shut down the internet, the society and population will not be able to judge the politics and laws. This is not only true, but also this is basically meaning that we're letting the government shut the population's mouths and not letting anyone talk about their opinions and sharing their thoughts to the whole world and letting everyone be conscious of these negative on these negative things that the government has created. And when the government shuts down the internet, this means that this will slow down the society's ability to spread more information up to the whole across the world or the country about the laws and politics and whether they have the ability to judge the laws and the politics and whether it's ethical or non-ethical and whether it's morally right or wrong. So moving on to my summary, the opposition, we have talked about how the society we have explained how the society has the right to share information and also has the right to talk people and share opinions. And this is and also this would help the government make better politics and create more solutions to more problems. And this will not only create a long-term benefit, but also this weighs a lot more than the opposition, the government point on preventing protests, which could cause chaos and violence. It's just a short-term harm because this is only caused by the people by unethical politics the government has made, which is also a good thing since the population has the rights, should have the right to have some ability to respond to these types of actions made by the government. So with all of that, thank you. I'm so proud to oppose.
At the start of the speech, I'd first like to recognize that our opening's entire speech is based off of the premise that government has a unique duty to keep and help support its citizens. However, this is a premise that they failed to explain, mechanize, or even mention at the bare minimum. This is a premise that CG weighs over OG. But before I explain how we fulfill this premise, I'd first like to solve the deadlock that we believe opening has. This is a deadlock about misinformation. Neither side can explain or weigh over each other about which side is likely to win on the premise of misinformation. So CG will come up and clarify this. Opposition's best case is that the misinformation and propaganda will still spread via human interactions. But why is misinformation still prevented or kept at a lower level on our side? Two reasons. First of all, it spreads at a significantly lower spread. Social media and news have millions of views every single day, meaning that millions of people will be able to access this information at once. This is what human interactions just fails to do. Second of all, recognize that people are just intuitively more likely to believe news or packaged propaganda that has false data than what their neighbor tells them, because people are just intuitively more likely to believe data or false experts and etc. So, Judge, moving on to my extension about government duty. Why do we believe that governments have a unique duty to help its citizens in cases of civil unrest? Two reasons. First of all, a social contract. Citizens give up certain freedoms in exchange for protection. Second, and the other extension from the social contracts, that government's primary job is to provide security, and if it fails to provide security and protection to its citizens in a time of civil unrest, it fundamentally breaks this contract. This means that having a social shutdown is not an attack on freedom, it is a temporary enforcement of the contract that private citizens just failed to do. Second of all, recognize that the governments alone control the police, military, and emergency services. This means that they have an exclusive power to stop violence, and this also means that they have exclusive duty to stop it, since they are the only people who have the power to stop it. They have the unique responsibility. And actually, thirdly, recognize that the reason that there's a principal reasoning here is that they recognize that the reason people or services or attend a mandatory military service is because in turn of all those services that people give the government has a duty or has a principal moral responsibility to provide its citizens with protection, with like dignity and etc. So this is also part of this debate, and also another reason why the governments have a duty. And recognize that CG uniquely gives to you how we fulfill this premise and how this duty matters, and thus how this duty is the only reason that governments have to act in situations of civil unrest. So then, Judge, what does this duty mean in impact for these civil unrest, or how does this duty play out in civil unrest? This recognizes that governments are likely to do two things. First of all, recognize that when governments act out, when governments contain this information, foreign powers are unlikely or are less likely to be able to control or exploit these social unrest. And recognize in times of civil unrest or instability, foreign countries show a trend of attempting or entering these countries to exploit and retain personal benefits. This looks like 20th century China, where Japan, England, Russia, and etc. many foreign powers came in to exploit the points, exploit the money and the multiple billions that the Qing dynasty had. Recognize that this also looks like Congo in 2025, where USA came in to mine minerals while they had a social unrest or civil unrest within. A shutdown means that the outside world will know little to no information about the unrest or the instability that is happening internally in the country, meaning that exploitation of foreign control over the country and soft power will unlikely to happen. This is further protecting the country. This the said country from further exploitation or foreign manipulation. But second of all, recognize that there's going to be a protection of infrastructure and welfare. Recognize that civil unrest includes civil wars. This is extremely likely in most developing nations because this debate happens not only in developed nations but also happens in developing nations. Think the Taliban in the Middle East and Southwest Asia, like in places like Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Pakistan, etc. Second, think about the Sudanian wars and Sudan ended in South Sudan and Sudan. Think about wars that happens because of religious disagreements in the Middle East or in Africa because they disagree on who the true inheritance of Muhammad is. These wars mean that there is mass destructive, if not contained, because these wars, these different opposition sides, or these civil unrest, or these revolts, or terrorists often have machinery, armory, and artillery. Yeah, this means that they can have the ability to cause mass destruction, not contained, meaning that they can actually go into a road, blow up all the infrastructure, blow up the buildings, blow up the hospital, blow up the schools, and etc., and blow up the roads. This just intuitively causes mass destruction. And so this means that when the government steps up to contain said violence, the infrastructure like roads and buildings will be helped and will be preserved, which is a benefit by default. And second of all, that also welfare, for example, programs, homeless welfare, benefits to poor children who lack resources, etc., will also be preserved because the country doesn't have to pay massive amounts of taxes to help these things and etc. So this is all preserved by default. This is a benefit that CG uniquely brings to you. Also, lastly, just to end my some clarifications is that from likes to these countries will the government will be exploiting their power. But why is this unlikely to happen? First of all, recognize that they did not explain why these governments have an incentive to randomly shut down or why this massive amounts of power for the government is extremely bad. But we will flip this and tell you why the government actually be properly using their power, because they have a proper incentive to properly use their power. Three reasons here. Recognize that every single social shutdown automatically causes certain economic losses. It's just very intuitive and is an automatic defect that happens, meaning that in order for the country to make economic profits or etc., the country will likely want to contain or shorten the amount of shutdown time because they want to make money, meaning that they're not going to randomly shut down. And second of all, recognize that the UN or foreign unions and policies will force to make them pay a fine if they exploit their power or use their power improperly. Thirdly, recognize that they will lose trust from their citizens if they randomly shut down without any proper reason. If you shut down to protect your citizens from civil unrest and terrorism, the citizens will support you, but if you randomly shut down just to retain or start an authoritarian regime, you are likely to face a major amount of backlash from your citizens. Thank you.
The government wants power to cut off internet during civil unrests. They tell you that this is about stopping all the trouble. They also tell you that this keeps people safe. But here's the truth. Actually, shutting down the internet does not stop troublemakers. It punishes everyone else. So in this speech, I'll first be giving my argument and then rebels in the building. So now think about what the internet actually does in people's daily lives. It's not just about social media and entertainment. It's, for example, how a parent finds if their child's school is closed because of the unrest. It's about how people can get updates about this disaster. It's how small businesses take payment and how people earn their wages. It's even how some people get updates about clean water or electricity during emergencies. When you cut down the internet, you're not taking off TikTok for bored teenagers. You're taking off the basic tool that ordinary people rely on just to get through the day. So during that time, so now let's give you an example of what happened to India a few years ago. The government cut the internet in Kashmir for over 400 days. And during that time, students couldn't access online learning. A whole generation of young people fell behind in their education because of the government's decision. Doctors couldn't coordinate with their hospitals and couldn't report what was actually happening. People couldn't even get money out of banks properly because so many transactions rely on internet verification. The people who need internet the most are the people who are trying to stay safe and survive the unrest. The government is worried that terrorists will communicate and coordinate attacks through the internet. But, well, terrorists have always found other ways to communicate, and they use a lot of old methods. They use like Morse codes and stuff like that. But what about an ordinary everyday person? For example, trying to get their kids safely home, the elderly person who needs to call an ambulance or call a taxi for help. They're just left in the danger with like no help and no warning about the disasters. So let me be clear now. The government that shuts down internet isn't fighting the protesters and terrorists. They're abandoning the public and leaving their citizens in danger. And I have a simple question for the government that they have not answered yet. When you cut off the internet for a whole city, how does a person check if their child or their family members made it home safely? How does an elderly person that needs help get rescued? And if you cannot answer that, you're focused, the government, on punishing those troublemakers, but they ignore those ordinary people and those like citizens who actually need help and who will be suffering from the internet shutdowns. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to some rebuttal. So the opposition's claim is that misinformation spreads on the internet really fast because there are like millions of views each day. But just because something like a post gets a million views doesn't mean a million people believe it. Think about how you use the internet. When you see a wild claim, like for example Instagram, what do? You scroll down and you read the comments and you check another source and you ask yourself, is this really real? The internet doesn't just spread lies, it also spreads like true information, fact checks, and evidence that supports the correct claim. Every rumor on the internet has a comment section full of people saying that this is not true. And shutting down the internet, those lies will spread. They will just move to like the word of mouth. And except now, there's no fact checks, no and no reporters trying to tell you what is true and what is not. So which one is more dangerous? A lie in a crowded room where people can argue back, or a lie in a room where people just believe it and because they have no evidence to support the other claim. And the opposition also provided you with many examples of how shutting down the internet helped civil unrests and protests. But here's the problem: the government side only told you the times that they think a shutdown actually worked, but they didn't tell you about the time shutdown of the internet failed. And now here are plenty of those examples that the government did not give you. So let's look at Ethiopia. They had multiple shutdowns, but did the violence in Ethiopia stop? No, it got worse. And what about Sudan? Shutdowns did not stop the protests. They actually made people angrier and more furious because they think the government is just trying to suppress and like oppress them. And what about Myanmar? The military shut down the internet, but those protests continued anyway. The shutdowns did not actually save the government, it has made ordinary people's lives harder. The government is just talking about like examples where internet shutting down worked, but they are ignoring the numerous times that when the government shut down the internet, it actually caused more chaos and more protests and more anger in the crowd. So now a brief summary of my speech. The closing opposition tells you that by shutting down the internet, you don't punish those troublemakers and those protesters. You actually make the lives of like ordinary people, of students, of elderly people worse. They cannot access like basic needs like calling a taxi, which is really dangerous. And instead of punishing those troublemakers, the government tries to punish innocent people, and it causes more chaos, more unrest, and more protests. So for all these reasons, we're so proud to oppose. Thank you.
first way over our opening, and then I'll go on to opposition side to say that why we weigh over OO and then to CO. I think firstly, why do we weigh over our opening? For three broad reasons. One, we tell that OG never explained to you why is it likely, or why are the impacts, or why the impacts are like so detrimental as they have proved. Well, Elisa has already proved to you three things. She proved to you firstly that it harms the infrastructure, that on how like that students actually go in and actually see in the daily lives, and what students could actually like since like these mobs like that they could actually like kill these infrastructures, right? We tell that it's just going to be even worse for students and like their daily life and like at a daily basis. Elisa has told you on how like the spread of misinformation is just going to be even worse on their side of the house. We told you the impact here is detrimental. It's because that when misinformation happens, this probably means that people are going to be like in a huger panic, and that there's just going to be larger panic among citizens. But thirdly, she has told you on how there's just going to be like less protection for like from like foreign countries, but also it's just going to be even worse because foreign countries are going to start attacking you. On how it's just going to be even worse, on how like the impact is just on a macro level as a general. Secondly, we told you our arguments are the prerequisite of theirs because the government has the duty to protect its citizens for like three reasons. One, the social contract. Two, it's because the government has like the power over like the whole country. Three, it's because of the moral responsibility. Why are these like the premise of OG's case? I think for two reasons. One, it's because the government has this moral obligation and duty to protect its citizens, meaning that this means that they have like the incentive to actually stop spreading misinformation out to citizens. This means that they have the incentive to say that, oh, I don't want this information to spread. It's because that it's going to be bad for me, right? It's going to be bad for me as a government because that I have this moral obligation to protect my citizens. Secondly, it's because that right now that these governments, because that they moral obligations, this also means that they don't want like these harmful effects that this could bring on like opposition side of the house, right? Thirdly, we tell that on like we have a larger scale impact than our opening. I think in two ways. One, we explain to you it not happens not only in a micro level on citizens, but exploitation on the macro level to countries. It not only brings like how there's going to be like internally going to be bad for citizens on how like is going to be internal fights within the countries, but more on over is because that we're showing your weak side to like strong superpowers like the US who dominate the world, who can actually have like strong military powers and can actually potentially kill your country or like to completely like manipulate your country because that they see the weakness of your side. I think it's just going to be even worse for the country and even on their side of house. I think secondly is that how like citizens would just have worse lives is because on our side, we tell that infrastructure at least like infrastructure problems can be solved in the short term, right? We tell that at least like education problems can be solved in the short term. At least we say that online access would be cut for like a short amount of time, but in the long term, like it can be reversible. It can be recovered, right? But on their side, this never happens, right? We explained to you on how like the citizens just have generally worse lives on their side of house. Okay, now on to OO. What did OO tell you? They tell you firstly that it's just going to be peaceful. Secondly, on how that there's going to be like more impact shown and people wouldn't have evidence on like just what is happening. This is what also like CEO has explained to you. Let me explain why is it not likely for this to be peaceful. Elisa has already explained to you on how like there's going to be extreme terrorists and probably like more ideologies, and especially these developed nations where probably these like internal fights and the unrest more likely to occur. It's because that there's like this generally like unstable system in these developed nations. But for example, like Pakistan, or like why Sudan like split into like Sudan and like South Sudan, right? This is probably because that they just cannot like control like internally, right? We tell that also like it's more likely for people to know what is going on even without like news or like evidence showing, because they're probably it's like they already live, right? They already live in like their own country. They already know what is going on at a day-to-day basis. If already like a bomb dropped off, right, then they probably know that hurt, right? People are dead, right? They probably know that what is already going on is because of this like such a big thing that is going on in their own country. It's more, for example, China like 100 years ago that there's like civil unrest, right? And everyone knows what's going on, considering that there's basically barely any internet going on at that time, right? Secondly, we tell that even if isn't it a good thing? Because like for people to not really know what is happening is because it caused more panic and then more people to get worried and scared, right? Wouldn't it just be worse for like people's welfare to cause like more panic? I think that they never explain on their side of house why is it specifically a good thing. They also tell you on how many people would probably think it's fake, right? We tell that to analysis. One, we tell that if government already intervening is already intervening this, the people would probably see the seriousness of this, right? If you're interested, if your internet shuts down, right, then you probably know something is going wrong. For example, a fire alarm suddenly went on in your house, then you probably know that there's something wrong with it, right? You probably know that there's probably like a potential fire coming up. You probably know that there's something wrong, right? You're not just going to say that, oh, I don't have my internet anymore and there's probably like nothing wrong with it. Secondly, that they know that what's going on in their daily life, as I have already explained, because they see it. They see terrorists like running and killing people, for example, right? They see it on a day-to-day basis. So I don't think the analysis that they have proved are like valid. Secondly, they tell you on how this is like bad for government since they have to have like so much power since they decide and they're so corrupt, and the impact is like people get suppressed by government because from like suffering. 3 reasons. One, that this is really costly, right? It causes like economic loss that Elisa has proved you on, like how millions of billions of dollars that they have to like spend on this. But secondly, backlash with like foreign countries. They know the potential that like other countries could actually attack the government, on how like this government could actually like could actually like die out, right? That the US already pays and already like US would actually pay them a fine. Thirdly, if like the government is already corrupt, then why are they likely to do good things in the long-term benefit that OO has already claimed? I think fourthly is on how like citizens already lose trust, that they're just not dumb, that they know that what they're going through on a day-to-day basis. CEO told you that that they're gonna take off like a basic tool that to support people, that leading to citizens with danger, to check family, and like to how students learn. I think these are the little things compared to bombs and exploitation from other superpowers. I think the impacts are just like very minor and like very small. It's because compared to ours, right? They give you an example of like Sudan and Ethiopia, but the thing is, Sudan never had experience a shutdown, and Ethiopia, they never explained that that they said that shutdown wouldn't work, right? They never explained to you that. They only like stated it. Thirdly, even if for it to not work, then to just let it go on and just watch it happen, right? And just let lives die, right? Which let's go some impact way. Firstly, reversibility. Reversible in the long term versus irreversible, which is going on in their side of the house. We tell that it's probably the impacts that they have proved are reversible in the long term. It's because not online access is short term, right? No online access is short term. That's additionally, alternatives exist, right? You can still use textbooks, right? You can still like go to class, right, without the internet, right? That's how people go to school. Secondly, irreversibility that goes on their side of the house. Schools blown up, right? People die, and countries like get like being manipulated by other strong superpowers. That's why it's so irreversible on their side, and the impact is so minor on their side of the house. Proud to be on CG.
Now, as the opposition whip, we firmly believe that the government should not have the right to shut down internet during civil unrest. So, for example, just imagine if you're like a cancer patient, and during these like civil unrest, and where like no internet, how will he or she access like these medical like insurances that should help his or her cancer? That is simply not possible, right? So moving on to like my framework. So in this speech, I'll first state the closing opposition's stance, and then summarize the debate in 3 questions, and then tell you why the closing oppositions win this debate. So first of all, this debate is not about order or chaos. It's about whether governments should use internet shutdowns as a legitimate tool of control. And we firmly believe that governments should not use these internet shutdowns as rightful tools for control. Because so first of all, the government's arguments are all about misinformation and fast actions, but they never acknowledge the rights for innocent people and normal residents. So the opposition's goal is to promote the rights for normal residents and the promotion of innocent people's rights. So moving on to the 3 questions that summarize this debate. So first of all, will shutting down internet platforms result to less misinformation? So my answer is, so like the closing opposition's answer is, when the internet information spreads through the words of mouth, which would actually be more likely to have unregulated messaging. So without internet, misinformation will not disappear. It becomes harder to correct because they spread through the word of mouth, not through internet. That means like offline rumors will be slower to track and check, and it would be impossible to monitor, and it will also be far more likely to escalate into panic. So people believe what they hear in closed networks because there's no public access source to verify it. So shutdowns let misinformation spread in a more unchecked and unchecked.
For example, in Iran, the governments shut down the internet to stop what it called as fake news. But instead of reducing misinformation, the shutdown actually allowed statements to spread without being challenged, and violent rumors spread within the communities offline. So even if misinformation travels very quickly online, the response can be really fast too, because platforms can remove these really harmful contents within, for instance, minutes or hours, and shut down. And however, as the government wants to shut down our system, that means that there will be no platforms and also no journalism sure.
So you say misinformation can spread just as fast in real life. When misinformation spreads faster than it can be verified during unrest, why should we prioritize speed of access over accuracy of information?
So first of all, I explained that these shutdowns also let misinformation spread in a more unchecked and unchallenged way, because there's no journalism that can regulate this information, and it would be impossible for governments to monitor these rumors. Okay, and then moving on to this. And when people are left in the dark, there will be more ridiculous statements that could be proposed. So moving on to the second question, why would shutting down internet platforms take away innocent people's lives? So first of all, when civil unrest break out, innocent people, for example, those who do not participate in these protests that include ordinary men, women, children, the elderly, and also the disabled people, they rely on the internet to call for help and access life-saving care. They need to use these internets to connect with emergency responders. And also, hospitals also depend on internets for records. So when the government shut down the entire internet, this entire emergency infrastructure collapsed. So my second response is that the opposition with second response is that shutdowns cut off the entire access to survival resources that innocent life. During unrest, civilians use the internet to access real-time safety alerts and find safe shelters, and they can also access for example, digital banks to withdraw their money for resources that include food or clothing. And so the trade-off that the government is actually proposing is that they want to desire control and oppression, and they want to exchange that for innocent civilians' lives. So this punishes every single sure. Our impacts of long-term destruction of welfare and infrastructure and foreign exploitation. This is the macro impacts of this debate, and you failed to engage with any of them. So first of all, what the government side is saying that they want to punish these innocent people's lives for these macro, for these long-term stability, which we have already rebutted in our first question. And moving on, so this is punishment for innocent civilians. What the government is trying to indicate is that they will punish innocent lives for control and oppression. And moving on to the third question, is shutting down internet accountable? So when the internet is being shut down, there will be no platform that can make these information accountable for their actions. Fast action is simply just fast and unregulated oppression. There's no social media to filter these news, and without internet, governments can possibly act quick, but in total darkness. There's no way to check if fast action is peaceful or violent. So no country, and also the closing government stated that they can have infrastructures that exist which is not digital. So however, actually no country in the world has a fully separate infrastructure that is not inherent for emergency and education service that can operate independently during a total shutdown without digital literacy. So it costs billions and take years to build and require universal access that simply do not exist, especially during sudden and unpredictable civil unrest. This is not a practical solution. And also now why the closing opposition wins this debate and why we are distinct from the opening opposition. So we've uniquely proven to you why that the shutdowns harm innocent people healthcare, banking, and education, etc. And this also disproportionately hurts the people who rely on public internet. This policy would enable governments to abuse power and cover up violence as they undermine democracy and also promote oppression. They're ineffective at stopping violence because they attempt to stop violence in darkness. So government should not have the right to shut down the internet because it is endangering innocent lives and do not propose any effective solutions for misinformation. So for all these reasons, we really urge the ballot for closing opposition.